Thanks for coming. Well, as you see, we're so kind of full today, and this is a slight different atmosphere. How many people have been here before? And how many people for the first time? Wow, welcome. So it must be Rupert. Couldn't be me. Okay, so we have 1 hour, and what I thought we'd do is I'll ask Rupert a few questions. I'll introduce him, of course. And then Rupert's going to lead us into a guided meditation on the nature of consciousness, a reflective meditation. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Total time about 1 hour plus, maybe 5-10 minutes. We're going all over the world through Facebook Live, through their influencers' channels. So tens of thousands of people are going to be watching this, and then it'll be on other channels too, and we'll make sure that everyone has links. How many people here know the expression, the hard problem of consciousness? Okay. So here's the hard problem of consciousness. Simply defined is we do not know, although we assume in science that the human brain produces this experience. We don't know how it does that. That's called the hard problem in consciousness. So right now you're looking at me. Okay? You're having an experience, a visual experience. What is happening, according to our current scientific paradigm, is there are photons that are coming from here, bouncing off this light directly into your eyes. And there's some electrochemistry happening in your retina. There's something called an action potential, an electrical signal that's going to your brain. And then there's electrochemical activity in your neural networks. And you have this experience. You see me, you hear sound, and basically we can't explain how that happens, even though we can look at the brain and see the neural correlates. It's a very tough problem in science right now. So if I ask you right now to imagine a beautiful red rose, do that. You're having an experience, right? Where is that experience happening? If I look inside your brain, there are these electrochemical activities, but you're having an experience, a red rose. Where is that happening? This is not explainable by our current science. No experience, whether it's perceptual or thought, or imagination, or creativity, or insight, or intuition, anything that we call a mental or physical perceptual experience, current models of science cannot tell us how that happens. We can see activity in the brain corresponding to it. That's the hard problem. So Rupert is here to solve it for us. Okay. Rupert is an extraordinary teacher. He teaches something called the direct method. And I met him at various conferences that occur in the country. One is called Science and Non-Duality. There's another conference called the Science of Consciousness, on and on. And I was struck by Rupert's clarity in giving people a direct experience of consciousness, or a little insight anyway. So Rupert, I'm going to ask you, there's so many definitions of consciousness. I just went to the Science of Consciousness where they described it as first-person experience. Other people say it's the knowing element in every experience. In the Vedanta, it's the potential for all experience, the immeasurable potential for all experience, whether it's this experience we're having or a mental experience or thought or emotion. What's your definition? So have I said enough about Rupert? He has 2 books. Okay? And he'll be doing a book signing. I have a copy for you, Matt, of both the books. So one is called Being Aware of Being Aware. Beautiful title. And the other is called The Nature of Consciousness, Essays on the Unity of Mind and Matter. Rupert lives in Oxford, in England. and he's become a very close friend. I admire him. I think he's one of the most eloquent teachers of meditation and what we call the direct method. Rupert, what's your definition of consciousness?
I would say that consciousness is that in which all experience appears, that with which all experience is known, and that out of which all experience is made.
So most people get the first two. Consciousness is that in which all experience appears. Consciousness is that
with which all experience is
known. I get that. But a lot of people say, what do you mean, out of which all experience is made? Is this microphone made out of consciousness?
Let's explore that, and let's explore this not intellectually or philosophically, but in our experience. Is anybody here currently experiencing anything other than the knowing of their experience?
Lena raised her hand.
Okay.
She's experiencing something other than the knowing of her experience.
Okay, well,
Lena, stand up.
Lena.
Well, I was rubbing the back of my neck.
Okay, so you were rubbing the back of your neck and you experienced a sensation as a result.
Yes.
Is there anything to that
There's
sensation?
and then my head, so.
Okay. So is there anything to that sensation in your experience other than the knowing of it?
Well, I'm working on the melding of the mind and body. So.
No, but just stay with the experience, the sensation of your hand on your neck. Is there anything to that experience other than the knowing of it? The experiencing of it?
It's like alive.
Yes, but is there anything to the feeling of aliveness other than the knowing of it? If you were to remove knowing or experiencing from your current experience, would any experience remain?
Well, you know the experience, that's why you're sharing it with us, right?
Yeah.
So there is the knowing of that experience. Okay.
Okay, so having seen, hopefully, that there is nothing to our current experience other than the knowing of it, go into your remembered experience, any experience you have ever had in your life. Was there anything to that experience other than the knowing of it or the consciousness of it? And now go into your imagined experience and feel free to push the boundaries as far as you like. You could imagine a near-death experience, a vision of God, an ecstatic moment, a migraine, a deep depression. Go anywhere you like in the realm of experience. Could you ever know anything other than the knowing of your experience, the consciousness of your experience?
Yeah, the wonder of it.
Is there anything to the experience of wonder other than the knowing of it? And you'll see in this way, if we're very simple, very experiential and very honest, nobody does ever experience, has ever experienced or could ever experience anything other than the knowing of experience. In other words, knowing or consciousness is all that is ever known or could ever be known. Why, as a culture, do we believe that there is something other than knowing or consciousness when nobody has ever or could ever experience anything other than that? The reason is simply that we believe it. It is the religion of materialism. Matter, in this context, we define as that which exists outside and independent of consciousness. But nobody has ever or could ever experience anything outside of consciousness or independent of consciousness. In other words, matter is a belief, never an experience. So materialism, the belief in stuff called matter, is a religion. If we stick closely to the evidence of experience, in other words, if we are true scientists and take evidence as the seal of reality, experience as the seal of reality, if we trust our experience, we come to the inevitable and inescapable conclusion that there is only knowing, there is only consciousness, and everything is a modulation of that.
So thought is a modified form of consciousness.
All there is to thought is the experience of thinking. All there is to thinking is the knowing of it.
So when I asked you to think of a sunset, when you had that experience, your consciousness modified itself into that experience. If I ask you to look at that, which without human constructs is a shape, a color, a form, that's the knowing of experience. The consciousness modifies itself into a shape, a color, form, sound, taste, texture. Am I expressing this all?
It's very easy to another way to check this in our experience. When the activity of mind, that is the activity of thought and perception, comes to an end, for instance in deep sleep, all experience comes to an end, all knowledge and experience of a world. We know nothing other than the content of our minds, the activity of our minds, and our mind is a movement of consciousness.
So Rupert, now in the whole field of the science of consciousness, I'm very involved in that. There are so many schools. Physicalism, the brain produces consciousness. Dualism, the mind and the physical world are two different things, which raises lots of conundrums. Panpsychism, idealism, non-duality, on and on. And you're a non-dualist, right? So what's the difference between non-dualism and... has anyone heard of panpsychism? So it's basically saying that consciousness is organized matter. The counter to that is matter organized consciousness. But it's right now a very fashionable thing in consciousness studies, panpsychism. What do you think of panpsychism?
Well, panpsychism, the belief that everything has a degree of consciousness, is at least a step in the right direction. Let us define materialism. Let's take my favorite metaphor of the screen and the movie. Materialism believes that the screen is generated by the movie. In this case, the screen is consciousness and the movie is matter. So materialism believes that matter generates consciousness. This is the fundamental assumption that underlies our world culture. Matter was here first, and consciousness is derived from matter. The hard problem of consciousness is, how is consciousness derived from matter? This is materialism. The movie, matter, generates the screen. So panpsychism is the belief that the movie is permeated by the screen. So panpsychism still starts with the movie, but it at least concedes that the movie is completely permeated by the screen. The materialist point of view believes that the screen is just a byproduct of the movie. So panpsychism acknowledges that everything that takes place in the movie is permeated by the screen. So that's a step in the right direction, but it is still based on the idea that the movie is primary and the screen is, albeit fundamental to the movie. The non-duality states that the screen is primary and the movie is a modulation of the screen. So there's no question of the screen, the movie being permeated by the screen, because there is no such thing as a movie with its own independent existence. You cannot peel a movie off a screen and say, here is the movie, and it is permeated by the screen. If you investigate the nature of the movie, all you find is the screen. So the movie is not permeated by the screen. All there is the screen. And the movie is a modulation or a colouring of the screen. In the same way, all reality is not permeated by consciousness. It is a movement of consciousness.
So, before we finish, and in case I forget, please remind, I want to address the question of what we call physical death and the connection to deep sleep. We won't go there right now. It's a little premature. Can we take us all through a guided meditation to give us some insight? Now, I have to tell you, Rupert has many hundreds of types of guided meditations, and I specially requested him to start with very basic, elementary, kindergarten level, if that's all right, because it's enough to give us an insight.
Yes, and in fact, if you understand the kindergarten level, really nothing else needs to be understood. The teaching is only elaborated for those that don't understand the kindergarten level.
So why don't we do that in the interest of the illusion of time?
How long would you like this to last, Deepak?
Let's do 15, 20 minutes, if that's okay with everyone.
Okay.
Is that good? How many people are practicing some form of meditation or another? Good. And so what Rupert's going to share with you is something called the direct method. There are many, many kinds of meditation, and you've probably seen hundreds of them on YouTube from Rupert, myself, many others, but let's go through this experience right now.
Simply let your experience be exactly as it is without any impulse to manipulate it or change it in any way. Thoughts, images, memories, feelings, sensations, sights if your eyes are open, sounds, textures, etc. And ask yourself the question, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience? When we walk down the streets of New York, all the objects that we see are, relatively speaking, illuminated or rendered visible by the sun's light. Ask yourself the question, what is it that renders my experience knowable? How come it is possible to know a thought? How come it is possible to experience a feeling? How come it is possible to perceive a world? Whatever it is that knows our thoughts is obviously not itself a thought. What is that? What is that? And whatever it is that perceives the world is obviously not itself a perception. What is that? Whatever it is that knows or is aware of our experience is what we commonly call I. I know my thoughts. I am aware of my feelings. I perceive the world. So another way of asking the question, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience, would be simply, what am I exactly? all my life, all our life, we have been calling ourselves I. When we were 5-year-old children, we referred to ourselves as I. We say, I had a dream last night. I slept deeply last night. In other words, I is that element of ourselves that remains consistently present throughout all experience. It is the common factor, the common element in all changing experience. What is that? Don't say, I don't know. You know yourself more intimately than you know any other thing. Even your most intimate thoughts and feelings are like strangers to you compared to your knowledge of yourself. Don't try to find yourself as an object of experience, a thought, a feeling, a sensation, or a perception. You are that with which these are known. You are that which knows all experience, but are not yourself an experience. You are too close to yourself to be known as an object, and yet you are never not known. See that the experience of being aware is common to all experience. If we are having a near-death experience, we are aware of it. If we are having an out-of-body experience, we are aware of it. If we are having a migraine, we are aware of it. If we are deeply depressed, we are aware of it. Being aware is the continuous element of all changing experience. And therefore being aware alone qualifies as I, the knowing element in all changing experience. The medium upon which, or within which, all experience appears. The empty field in which the fullness of experience appears and disappears. Ask yourself the question, can I find an edge to the field of awareness in which my experience appears? Travel with your attention as far as you can go through the field of awareness in which your experience appears. See if you ever encounter an edge to that field. I'm sure everyone here must at some stage as a child have lain awake at night wondering how far physical space went on. Is there anyone here who did not ask themselves that question as a child? Ask yourself the same question now, but not how far does physical space go on, but how far does the aware space in which my experience appears go on? Can I find an edge to it or a limit to it? Do I ever encounter a place outside the field of awareness? See if with your attention you can leave the field of awareness and encounter something beyond it. See in this way, not intellectually, but in your experience, that although the objects of experience are all limited, that in which experience arises itself has no limits. And now ask yourself the question, can the space of awareness in which my experience appears ever be disturbed? It's like asking, could the space of this room, the physical space of this room, ever be disturbed by anything that took place within it? Does anything that takes place in this room change the nature of the space, relatively speaking, in which it appears? Is the space in this room in a different condition now than it was in yesterday or last year or 10 years ago or 100 years ago? Or is it in exactly the same condition? Likewise, is the space of awareness, the field of awareness in which all experience appears, ever changed, disturbed, harmed, tarnished, aged by experience, or is it always in the same pristine condition? Remember, I'm not speaking of some abstract intellectual concept of consciousness. I'm speaking about what we call I, myself, what we essentially are. Is what we essentially are ever disturbed by experience? Is it ever aged or harmed or tarnished by experience? Or is it always in the same pristine, ageless, genderless, borderless, formless condition? See in this way that what you essentially are cannot be disturbed. Thus, peace is your nature, not something you have to work hard at acquiring, not something you have to meditate for years in order to access. Peace is our nature prior to and independent of all experience. It can only be recognized, it cannot be acquired. just as nothing that takes place in this room adds anything to or removes anything from the space itself. So nothing that takes place in experience adds anything to or diminishes our essential self. In other words, our essential self is inherently fulfilled, not fulfilled as a result of experience. A fulfillment that is prior to and independent of experience. In other words, happiness is our nature. And is not dependent upon what is or is not taking place in experience. In other words, the peace and happiness for which all people long can be found simply by knowing ourselves as we truly are, independent of the content of our mind, body, or world. Ask yourself the question: if the field of awareness, which I essentially am, has no limits, how can there be more than one awareness? How could there be more than one unlimited awareness or consciousness? Be open to the possibility that the awareness or the consciousness in which all our experience appears, with which our experience is known, and out of which all experience is made, is the same, single, infinite, indivisible consciousness. In other words, be open to the possibility that we all share our being. That we are not numerous different selves, that we are all modulations of a single self, if we can call it a self. A single consciousness modulating itself in the forms of each of our minds, but never ceasing to be itself. And be open to the possibility that what we commonly call love is the experience of our shared being. In other words, be open to the possibility that love and true knowledge are one and the same thing.
So, consciousness has no form. It's formless.
Yes.
And being formless, it can't be imagined.
Yes. Everything that the mind knows or experiences or imagines is, by definition, a reflection of its own limitations. In other words, the mind superimposes its own limitations on everything that it knows or experiences. And therefore, although the mind is made of reality, it cannot know reality. Because everything the mind knows is we could say, a reification or an objectivization of its own limitations. In other words, just as one wearing orange-tinted sunglasses will see everything orange, so the mind sees everything in a way that is consistent with its own limitations.
So the normal experience, that's consciousness, right? That's siren, by the way.
All there is to the experience of the sound is the knowing of it.
Yes. But the normal, everyday experience of what we call a person is there's me, this limited self, squeezed into the volume of this body and the span of a lifetime. There's me, I was born, and I suddenly acquired this identity, this person that I call Deepak. And there's me and there's everything else. But I think what you're saying is that which I call me and everything else is a modulation of a formless, infinite
Yes.
awareness.
And
this is an experience.
Yes. Let's use the analogy of what takes place when we have a dream at night. When we have a dream at night, our own mind, which in this analogy is a field of infinite possibilities, our mind could have any dream. So on any particular night, our mind has one dream. But our mind doesn't know that dream directly. The mind imagines the dreamed world within itself, but in order to know that dreamed world, it has to enter into its own dream and seem to become a separate subject of experience in that dream, from whose point of view the dreamed world is known. In other words, when our mind has a dream, our mind forgets or overlooks that it is dreaming. It enters, it imagines the dreamed world, but it views that dreamed world from within that world as an apparently separate subject of experience. So I would suggest that each of our minds is like a dreamed mind in the mind of infinite consciousness. In other words, each of us are like dreamed characters through whose agency infinite consciousness is knowing itself as the world. Just as when we fall asleep in New York and dream that we are walking the streets of London, we forget that we are asleep in New York. We enter into the dreamed world, the streets of London, and we seem to become a person on the streets of London, from whose point of view the streets of London are known. But when we wake up, we realize that our own mind, our own indivisible mind, divided itself into two parts: a multiplicity and diversity of objects that are known, and a separate subject of experience that knows them. I would suggest that exactly the same thing is happening here, that infinite consciousness, unlike our own mind, which can only have one dream at a time, I would suggest that infinite consciousness can have innumerable dreams at the same time, and that each of our minds are dreams in the mind of infinite consciousness. And just as the streets of London that we dream of at night are really what the inside of our own mind looks like, from the perspective of somebody on the streets of London. So all of this is what the inside of consciousness looks like, or in religious language, what God's mind looks like when viewed from the perspective of a separate subject of experience.
But then God is not a deity.
No, God in this case is infinite consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And we are fictional characters in that...
We are the dreamed subjects of experience through which infinite consciousness, or God's infinite being, knows itself as the world. In other words...
One of Schrodinger's famous quotes in his book, What is Life, is consciousness is a singular that has no plural.
Yes. Yes, when we watch a movie, we may see 10,000 people in the crowd, but when we run our finger across the screen, it's a single, indivisible screen. And that is very easy, and that is analogous to our experience. Consciousness is a single, indivisible whole, and it's very easy to check that. Ask yourself now, are you having 10,000 experiences, or are you having a single experience? We're all having a single experience. It's not possible to have two experiences at the same time. Experience is always one. Why? Because the stuff it is made of is one. The screen of awareness, which assumes the forms of experience, is an indivisible whole. That is why experience is always homogeneous. There's always one experience taking place.
But we can interpret the experiences differently.
Experience appears as a multiplicity and diversity of objects, just like our TV screen appears as 10,000 people. But we're interested here not in how things appear, but how things are. When we investigate the reality, that which is real in experience, all we find is consciousness. And if we explore the nature of consciousness, consciousness is a single, unlimited, and indivisible field.
Let me quote something from the Vedanta, and then let's open this to everyone else. So, how many people know what Vedanta is? Anyone? It's a Sanskrit word which means the culmination of all knowledge, and the body of the literature is attributed to what we in Eastern traditions call seers. So there's seer, seeing, and scenery. There's knower, knowing, and known. There's observer, process of observation, and that which is observed. And the Vedanta says that it's all a modulation of the single consciousness, is all knowers, all modes of knowing, and all objects known within that field. So here's the quote: "That which cannot be seen, but without which there is no seeing. That which cannot be perceived, but without which there is no perception. That which cannot be thought of, but without which there is no thought. That which cannot be imagined, but without which there is no imagination. That which has no form, but without which there is no experience of form." Would you say that's a pretty accurate quote? That you are, Tattvamasi. That is who you are.
Yes, it's accurate, but not yet complete.
Please explain.
I'm not going to go through the whole list, but let's just take one that which cannot be thought, but without which there is no thinking. It's absolutely true. The whole list is absolutely true, but the step that this statement doesn't yet take is that although it cannot be thought about, and yet all thought is dependent on it, what it doesn't yet state is that everything that is thought, everything that is perceived, everything that is imagined, everything that is felt, everything that is known is not just made possible by its presence, but is made out of its presence.
It's a modulation.
So we are not just speaking about a formless reality behind experience, behind the universe, that is not itself the universe. We are talking about the very fabric of reality, the stuff that not only makes experience possible, that not only renders experience knowable, but is the very stuff out of which all experience is made. In other words, we're talking about the sole reality, the sole infinite and indivisible reality of all that seems to be.
So I'm looking at this candle, I call it an object. But before I can call it an object, it is an experience that is then reified with the notion of an object.
Yes, the idea of an object is superimposed. The idea of an object that is known by a separate subject, both the object and the subject are superimposed by thought onto the reality of our experience, just as when we have the dream at night and we dream that we are walking on the streets of London, both the streets of London, that is the separate object, and the subject that knows them, that is ourself walking on the streets of London, are both modulations of our own indivisible mind asleep in New York. So the subject and the object are superimposed or imagined. They never actually come into existence. All that actually is consciousness. And this is why in the Bhagavad Gita it says that which is never ceases to be, and that which is not, that is a multiplicity and diversity of objects and subjects, never come into existence. They have no real independent existence of their own. That which truly is only infinite consciousness. And all of this is not just made possible by that, but it is that.
So this is a new compilation of essays which I've enjoyed very much. Being aware of being aware. Can you give us an experience of being aware of being aware? And can we call it an experience?
We can call it an experience, but it is a unique experience. It is the only experience there is that has no objective qualities. In other words, it is the only experience there is that is not subject to the limitations of the finite mind. And it is for this reason that it is known as absolute knowledge. It is a unique knowledge. So what do we mean by being aware of being aware? First of all, if I were to ask you the question now, are you aware of your thoughts? I trust all of you would say yes. But in order to answer the question, are you aware of your thoughts? In order to answer that question, yes, we have to first direct our attention to a thought. And as a result of that, as a result of coming in contact with the thought, we say, yes, I am aware of the thought. Now, if I were to ask you the question, are you aware of the tingling sensation at the soles of your feet? Pause. We each direct our attention to the sensation at the soles of our feet, and as a result of knowing that experience, we each answer yes. If I were to ask you, are you aware of this piece of calligraphy on the wall? We all direct our attention towards the piece of calligraphy. We know it, and as a result, we all say, yes, I am aware of the calligraphy. So now what happens if I simply ask you the question, are you aware? I trust that you all say yes. Now, to what experience did you refer in order to enable you to answer the question, am I aware? With the answer, yes. You didn't refer to your thoughts. You didn't refer to your sensations. You didn't refer to your perceptions. What did you refer to? To the experience of being aware. Nothing mystical about that, nothing spiritual, nothing extraordinary. Instead of being aware of your thoughts, sensations and perceptions, you were aware of the experience of being aware. without realizing it, you have just had the most profound and the most significant, the most precious, the most valuable and the highest experience it is possible to have. Of course, it doesn't rate very highly on the scale of experience because it has no color, no form. It has nothing that the mind can qualify or hold on to. And yet, in that experience lies the peace and happiness for which all people long above all else. Was it difficult for anyone to answer yes to the experience, am I aware? Did anyone have any doubt as to whether or not you were aware? The experience of being aware is equally available to all people under all circumstances and at all times. The only difference between the people like the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Meister Eckhart, or Ramana Maharshi, etc., and most people is that most people are so exclusively fascinated with the content of their experience, their thoughts, feelings, activities, relationships, etc., that they overlook the simple experience of being aware. They overlook the presence of awareness. The only difference with people like the Buddha and Ramana Maharshi is that they didn't overlook their own being. They didn't allow experience to obscure the knowing of their own being. They weren't special people, they weren't extraordinary people, they didn't have special access to the nature of their own minds. They were just people like you and I, regular people with regular thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships. The only difference was that they didn't allow their own being, the simple experience of being aware, to be obscured by their thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships. They had no privileged access to their true nature. They had no special qualifications. No special qualifications are required. Everyone has equal access. And our own being is available 24/7, in all circumstances, at all times, under all conditions. It is just there for the asking, the source of all peace and happiness.
The scenery never overshadowed the seer.
Unless we give it permission to do so, in which case it will seem to do so. If we are watching a movie and we are so absorbed in the movie that we forget it is a movie and we become involved in the movie, we will forget that we are seeing a screen and we will seem instead to see a landscape. If we see in this way, the world will appear in this way. But as soon as we withdraw that permission, as soon as we withdraw the permission of the movie to veil the screen, we realize that we were seeing the screen all along. And so we are free. Each of us is free either to allow our experience to obscure the experience of being aware and thus veil the peace and happiness that is inherent in it, or we are free to see that the experience of being aware shines brightly in all experience. It shines equally brightly in a deep depression as in an ecstatic moment or simply the taste of tea, just as the screen is equally evident in all types of movie.
Last question from me, and then we have 10 minutes. Deep sleep. I didn't forget. Okay. And its connection to what we call death.
Well, most people believe that deep sleep is the absence of awareness. I would suggest it is the awareness of absence.
Does everybody please think about that sentence? Can you repeat that sentence?
Normally we think that awareness disappears in deep sleep. In other words, that deep sleep is the absence of awareness. I would suggest that Everything apart from awareness disappears in deep sleep. The activity of the mind, the body, and the world disappear, and that awareness remains. In other words, the deep sleep is not the absence of awareness, but the awareness of absence. And if it were not for the presence of awareness in deep sleep, we would not have the experience, I slept well. If awareness, that is our essential self, were to disappear in deep sleep, we would become non-existent in deep sleep. In other words, we would all be terrified of falling asleep at night because we would feel that every night we went to our death. Is anyone here terrified of sleeping deeply? Do we not all look forward to deep sleep? We look forward to deep sleep because we cease to exist there? No, if we ceased to exist in deep sleep, we would be terrified of the experience. We love the experience. We look forward to it. We look forward to it precisely because in deep sleep, everything apart from ourselves leaves us. Our activities, our relationships, our thoughts, our feelings, our activities, and we are left all alone with ourselves. And that is why it is peaceful there, because we are all alone without any activity. And the nature of ourself, in the absence of the activity of the mind, is peace. And we experience that every night when we fall asleep, and that is why we all look forward to falling asleep.
So is deep sleep kind of going back to infinite consciousness?
Well, it's not going back to infinite consciousness because we never cease to be infinite consciousness, but it is like an unveiling. Let's use the analogy of the screen in the movie, but in this analogy, consciousness it's not like a screen that is being watched by someone sitting on a sofa. Consciousness is like an aware screen that has the ability to watch the movie that is playing upon it. So the movie of experience is like a colouring of the screen of consciousness. Consciousness never goes anywhere. We never go anywhere. We, consciousness, have never gone anywhere in our lives. Experience is a colouring or an activity of ourselves. In deep sleep, that colouring or activity ceases and it leaves pure consciousness all alone where it always is. But that place where consciousness always is not a place in space or a moment in time. Time only comes into existence with thought. Space only comes into existence or apparent existence with perception. So time and space have no existence independent of the mind. They are the activity of the mind. That is why deep sleep always seems to take a fraction of a second, because in our experience, in consciousness's experience, there is no time or space. Time and space only come into apparent existence with the activity of thought and perception.
Okay. Any question?
Okay, we can start here.
Thank you. In terms of this sleep, what you were just saying, sometimes in the morning, just before my eyes open, I notice like I'm still having thoughts of the dream. You know, like I notice that the dream's not completely over, but I'm aware of it. And then I notice that I'm starting to become aware of my bedroom. And I play with it sometimes, like it's like, and then I come back out. And I'm just saying, do you just walk around all the time, just not maybe you, but is the objective just to walk around playing back and forth like that?
Like you say, that there is this transitional phase between dream and the waking state where you are still dreaming, but you are aware of it. In other words, you are lucid dreaming. Mm-hmm. So we could say that what we are aiming at here is lucid waking.
Hi, Rupert. We have been, my wife and I, late at night, have been benefiting greatly by reading Being Aware of Being Aware in the Dark before going to sleep. And in the last couple of nights, we revisited this wonderful metaphor that you have given in the book and maybe in other places of John Smith and King Lear. And I was so helped by that. I don't know why it is that sometimes something can trigger some kind of opening, but I was just so helped by this image, and I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit in the context of this moment, if that seems appropriate to you at this moment.
Is anyone here familiar with my analogy of John Smith and King Lear? Okay, a few of you, but okay, well, forgive me, those of you that are familiar with it. It's I think, a very nice analogy that really gives the essence of meditation or prayer. And in this analogy, John Smith is an actor. He could play any part. All parts are available to him, but on this particular evening he's playing King Lear. So John Smith dresses up as King Lear. He puts on King Lear's clothes, but he also puts on King Lear's thoughts and feelings, and as a result seems to cease being John Smith and to become King Lear. Now, a good actor doesn't forget that he is John Smith. He continues to know himself as John Smith, but plays the part of King Lear. But in this analogy, he's not such a good actor, and he does forget that he's John Smith. He enters into the play so fully, enters into King Lear's life so fully, that he actually forgets that he's John Smith. He believes and feels, I am King Lear, and as a result, he is miserable. He's in conflict with all his daughters, and he's miserable. Now, at the end of the play, his friend comes backstage to congratulate him on his good performance, but finds him miserable. And so he asks him, why are you miserable? And King Lear begins to tell him about his relationship with his daughters and his troubles in his kingdom and everything. And his friend says to him, no, don't be silly. You're not miserable because of your relationship with your daughters. You're miserable because you've forgotten who you really are. You don't know yourself. So he asks King Lear to describe himself. And he said, well, I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I have a kingdom. And his friend says, no, you're not really a father. What are you before you became a father of 3 daughters, or you acquired a kingdom? And so King Lear now starts to describe his thoughts. And his friend says, no, but your thoughts are not essential to you. Go back further. What are you before your thoughts? And King Lear starts to describe his feelings, his most intimate feelings, his love of his daughter. And his friend says, no, your feelings are not always with you. They are not essential to you. They leave you regularly. So in this way, King Lear doesn't yet realize it. He's being taught self-inquiry or meditation, or he is tracing his experience back through layers of himself, through his activities, his relationships, his thoughts and feelings. And every time his friend asks him, no, go back further, who are you really? King Lear begins to pause. He finds it more and more difficult to describe or define what he essentially is. And at some point there is this recognition, I am John Smith. And the moment he recognizes I am John Smith, his suffering comes to an end. Now, so in this analogy, John Smith is, of course, infinite consciousness. King Lear is not a separate person or a separate self that John Smith becomes. He is simply a temporary and imaginary limitation of John Smith. So each of us are not finite minds or separate selves in our own right. There is no such thing or entity as a person or a self. What we essentially are is simply a temporary and ultimately imaginary limitation of infinite consciousness. And the reason we suffer is because consciousness, like John Smith, has lost itself in its own activity. Mind, experience, is the activity of consciousness. So consciousness, like a not very good actor, has lost itself in its own creativity, and as a result has suffered. And consciousness has to find its way back to itself in order to discover its innate peace. Now, this tracking back of its experience to itself, this King Lear tracing his experience back to his essential self, John Smith, is what's called meditation or self-inquiry, and it is indeed the essence of prayer. But what is important is that it's not King Lear that has the recognition, I am John Smith. In other words, it is never the finite mind that can know infinite consciousness. It is John Smith that has the recognition, I am John Smith. It is only infinite consciousness that can know infinite consciousness. So although King Lear feels that he is doing the investigating, who am I? I'm not my thoughts, they're not essential to me. All that is the activity of King Lear's mind. The recognition, I am John Smith, belongs to John Smith alone. Likewise, the investigation that we undertake takes place at the level of the mind. Are my thoughts essential to me? Are any of my activities and relationships essential to me? What is it that knows or is aware of my experience? All these questions are activities of the mind, but the recognition, I am consciousness, is not something that takes place in the mind. It is consciousness alone that recognizes I am consciousness. So when we ask the question, am I aware? That is an activity of the mind. When we answer the question, am I aware, with the answer yes, that yes is an activity of the mind. But between the question and the answer, consciousness recognizes itself. Consciousness knows itself. It knows itself as it is. That is the moment when John Smith takes off King Lear's costume and knows the experience, I am John Smith. And that is not a strange or an extraordinary or a mystical or a spiritual experience. It is just John Smith knowing himself as he essentially is, before he is coloured by the character of King Lear.
So Rupert, I have a question. How many people saw the movie Gandhi, Ben Kingsley? Before many people's time, I guess. So Ben Kingsley, when he decided to play Gandhi, for which he won the Oscar, he studied Gandhi's life, and then he became Gandhi in his internal persona. He gave up cigarettes, he gave up alcohol, and for that 1 year that he was doing the movie, he became celibate. Okay, so he could get into the role. And he became the role. He lived the role. And I've talked to a lot of good actors, so this character, John Smith, could next day play Hamlet, right? Or conceivably, with the right costume, even Cleopatra. But if he's really a good actor, then he doesn't lose the witnessing awareness in which the acting is taking place. Yes. And this, in a way, is kind of analogous to the doctrine found in many spiritual traditions, to be in the world and not of it, to be engaged and yet be the witnessing awareness in which that engagement is occurring.
It's the lucid waking that we spoke of earlier. It's participating fully in activities, thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships, but without allowing our experience to veil our reality, to veil the reality of experience.
Awareness.
Yes. And in this, I just want one more thing about that. Those of you that have studied the Eastern traditions will know this word Maya, which is usually translated as illusion. And
my mother's favorite word.
And the world in this tradition is said to be an illusion because it veils its reality, just as a movie could be said to be an illusion because it veils the screen. However, there is another meaning and a deeper meaning of the word Maya, and that is creativity or display. Like a creative display, because just as the movie can either be seen to veil the screen or to shine with the presence of the screen, depending on how we look at it, so experience can either be seen to veil reality or to shine brightly with its reality. So these are the two meanings of Maya. Maya is either a concealing power or a revealing power, and we are free to see our experience in either of these two ways. And our experience will appear consistent with whichever of these two views we take.
I don't know if this is true, but a long time ago, somewhere I read that the word Maya, the word matter, the word meter, the word time, the word music, the word mother, the word mater, and the word matrix have a common root. That the matrix is actually consciousness which is not apparent in its expressions. Other questions?
In this dream of being in New York, I don't have questions actually. I have a simple wish. Can I express my wish with you guys?
Sure.
Can I have a picture with two of you right now? After all, this is all Maya.
You're doing what humanity has done: sacrifice the self for the selfie.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as long as nobody else repeats that, may he have a picture with you after the meeting.
I have a question. Hi, I have a question. Is this similar to being in a dream of an infinite dreamer? That's the sense that I got. That it's almost like being in a dream of a great infinite source of a dream.
Yes, the dreaming mind is infinite. Consciousness is infinite. But each of our minds are like a finite dream appearing in and made of infinite consciousness. Just like the dream you have at night is a limitation of your own unlimited mind, so each of our minds are limitations of a single unlimited consciousness.
Hi. My question is to the two of you. I find that after I read your books and I listen to you on YouTube, I feel very aware and very conscious. And then I go out into my life and then I get lost in the illusion, in the what you call Maya. And I guess I was just wondering, after doing this for so long, do you not get lost in it anymore? Are you always aware of being aware?
Rupert is, I'm not. I get sucked into the drama.
I'd just like to add something to that. I'm very reluctant to say always.
Most of the time.
Yeah, we never know what's around the corner. We shouldn't aim for perfection. None of us know what's around the corner. When somebody once asked Atmananda Krishna Menon, how do we know when we are established in our true nature? And he said, when thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships can no longer take us away. So it is true that when thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships no longer take us away, we are established in our true nature. But from time to time, something may happen which triggers an old feeling, and we lose ourselves in our experience. But we don't lose ourselves very often, and we don't lose ourselves for very long.
I do find it's less and less.
If it's less and less, and when it does happen, it happens for less and less.
Unfortunately, just one more question, and then Rupert is available to sign the two books if you are interested.
Okay, over here.
One is called The Nature of Consciousness, the other is called Being Aware of Being Aware.
Hello.
One question.
I have a quick question regarding meditation. So Deepak, I started with reading your 7 spiritual laws of success like 10, 15 years ago.
20 years ago.
I read it maybe 10 years ago.
Actually, it was 25 years ago. Anyway.
Thank you for the book. It was really enlightening. But what I've found is when I'm very stressed and I meditate, the experiences are more painful if it's painful. It's more joyful if it's joyful. And how is it possible to detach from, whatever hurt is going on in your real life when you're meditating? I stopped meditating for 2 years because I felt the experience is a lot stronger when I was meditating if things are going rough. And when things are good, it's definitely multiplied. Is there a trick?
Well, it's a release in a way of stress, but I'd let Rupert answer this question. Because a lot of people have a lot of... I've even seen people in the old days, in the 60s, 70s, that they would go into almost psychotic depression or anxiety as a result of practicing meditation.
The most important thing to understand from this perspective is that meditation is not an activity we do with our minds, and nor is it even the cessation of the activity of our minds. In this approach, meditation is what we are, not what we do. Meditation is to stand knowingly as the open, empty space of awareness in which all experience appears and with which all experience is known.
But she is experiencing stress as a result.
Yes,
She's experiencing anxiety, pain.
Well, it's very common that when we start meditating, we are no longer trying to avoid uncomfortable experiences through substances, activities, relationships, etc. So we're just standing knowingly as the openness in which our experience arises. And as we are no longer manipulating or suppressing our experience, there seems to begin with, it's as if a can of worms has been opened, and all these old feelings that we previously more or less successfully repressed now begin to come up. So the fact that you experience an intensity of these experiences is not a sign of the failure of your meditation. It is a sign that your meditation is working. I'm afraid it's a good sign. Don't be disheartened by it. But don't be persuaded by your experience to get involved with your thoughts and feelings again. Be the openness in which through which this storm is. Let the storm pass through you.
I think there's something that happens when you start to lose your habitual certainties about reality. Don Hoffman, who's a cognitive scientist, you probably know who he is. He's spent 30 years trying to explain consciousness with brain science, and he couldn't. And when he started to lose his habitual certainties about what is reality, he told me he had a gut-wrenching experience. He spent his entire life trying to explain consciousness and then realized that every explanation was a construct, and he went through a very deep kind of crisis.
Yes, it can be terrifying.
Yes.
Everything that we have invested our identity in, our thoughts, our feelings, our activities, and our relationships, we either intuit or we understand that they are not essentially who we are. And this recognition, it's a kind of death of the self that we previously considered ourselves to be. And that sometimes this death happens very, very gently. Our old identity just gradually fades. But in other people, it can be terrifying because we feel literally that we are dying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had that experience. So thank you very much. And thank you, Rupert. And before we finish, I want to acknowledge Paulette Cole, who's sitting there quietly, without whose contribution we wouldn't have this space and this opportunity. And her lovely daughter, Lena, who's the first person who asked you the question, and Tiana and Sarah. Thank you all, and thank all of you for coming. Good night.